employers are hiring, but don't expect a bigger paycheck. There's a common misconception out there in the labor markets right now that there's a lot of liquidity and a lot of fluidity in the way jobs and talent is flowing from company to company. Don't get me wrong, it's a really difficult market right now to find talent, especially if you're operating at certain levels of the wage ladder. But supply and demand is absolutely in effect. And where nearly everybody thinks that you can go to any company and get a bigger paycheck and really go anywhere you like, that just isn't really the case when you really dive into the details of what's causing the labor shortage or the dynamics around the labor shortage. And we'll dive into that in a little bit because wage growth is actually surprisingly low. And companies aren't really trying to compete at the wage level, especially as you start to go up the ladder in terms of attractiveness of the company or different kind of income levels. So, despite what might be, the thought out there that you can jump, significant amounts of money when you change jobs right now, wage data indicates that really people that have changed jobs on aggregate in the last couple of years have really only bumped up their pay by about 4%. And people who have stayed at their jobs or stayed at their employers have bumped up their pay 3%. So there really isn't that much of an incremental gain in terms of wage growth for most of or at least the aggregate working population. Where you really see a lot of the hikes in pay and wage rates is at the lower end of the wage spectrum. So, companies, Starbucks just yesterday announcing that they're jumping their minimum wage up to $15, bumping it up again in the new year to $17. And then in some locations, people can find jobs working for Starbucks at $23 an hour. And you're seeing lots of different companies do this. Amazon's doing a big push with advertising right now around their employer brand and showcasing that they're jumping their minimum wage up to 15. So you can see a lot of wage growth at that level of kind of the wage ladder. But when you look up at the higher paying jobs and the knowledge work jobs or the service work jobs where you're looking at the six figures or the middle six figures, or even in the high kind of 50, 60, 70, 80K range, there's a lot less fluidity. People are looking for work, definitely. And companies are definitely in need of talent. But again, supply and demand dynamics are at play there. Companies know that at that level, you might be able to get a little bit of a stream of candidate flow, and then they don't have to jump their wages up so high. There's also a value component to this kind of work as well, where it's absolutely detrimental for a restaurant, for example, to not be able to make money if they don't have staff members to serve clients and things. Or imagine kind of a drive-through. If there's not enough workers to service the clients that come through a drive-through, that store just cannot make any money. You think of some of the knowledge work, that's available around maybe a social media manager or something like that. Companies, yes, they might need it, or it would be a kind of a luxury to expand that department, but it's not necessary for them to do business on a day-to-day basis. And so there's that supply and demand there component that I think is important to remember. A nice or an interesting caveat or something to think about is the last in first out dynamic, a little bit like inventory LIFO, where the last 18 months have been so dramatic and so drastic in the way that it shifted and jolted and kind of shook the labor markets that you can envision a place where 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the road, these companies that have hired workers that are a little bit more on the luxury side versus the necessary kind of labor that goes into operating day in, day out. And when there isn't as much money flowing around the system and maybe the CFOs or the finance people at the company start to look at their costs, you're going to get into this dynamic where individuals who are the last into an organization are going to be the first ones to get pushed out if companies have to downsize. The last 18 months have been excellent for certain companies in terms of their cash flows and their balance sheets. You can imagine what's kind of the dynamics around stimulus and different things, and then how that's impacted balance sheets. You're actually starting to see that with earnings right now. The latest earnings season, some of the large companies, the Amazons, the Apples, have really missed hard, and part of that, of course, is tied to the supply chain shortages and the supply chain disruptions. But you can start to see where in the next year or so, the next 2 years, all the people that have moved, transitioned from one company to another company in the last 18 months, they become, the individuals that are probably, if you get to a place where companies have to let people go, they'll be the ones that'll get let go. And so it's risky. There's a lot of risk around changing jobs in kind of the disruption of the market right now. That said, if there is a great opportunity out there where you get paid a lot more money than you do right now, like we're definitely on the side of go and get as much money as you can. But there's definite risk inherent in that too. So it's just an interesting time that there's, just to kind of go back to the original point, there's a lot of talk around wage hikes. And here's a chart actually of how employers are actually tactically addressing the labor shortage. And what you'll find, and of course, companies are smart enough to know and respond to what real-time data they're getting back from the markets. And the markets, by this I mean the talent markets. And so, companies are offering a little bit more money, no doubt. But when you look at this list here and you look at on a rank basis where companies are actually putting their efforts to try and attract and retain talent, base pay and year-end bonuses, spot bonuses are actually at the bottom end of the spectrum. I mean, we know for a fact too that individuals and workers are looking for more flexibility, and pay is not actually as high on the list of priorities. And so companies that are offering more flexible work hours and more flexible work locations and marginally more benefits and things are actually seeing a greater return on those than increasing base pay, because the last 18 months has shown us that really money is one of those things that, yes, it's a nice to have and people will move for money, but it's not always the end all be all. It's not always the determining factor when people think about work. There's a lot more that goes into it, and we're seeing that companies are actually realizing this and understanding that, okay, there's other things that they can provide to kind of boost their employer brand aside from money. So going back to the point of the video or the article, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of media coverage around jumps in wages and jumps in pay. But the reality is that it's not as profound or as pronounced as most people think. Again, kind of going back to the stat where on aggregate, wage hikes have really gone up about 4% for people that have changed jobs in the last 18 months, and really only 3%, or compared to 3% for people that have stayed. So that 1 percentage point is kind of the delta there when you think about the change. So interesting things to think about, especially if on both sides of the equation. As an employer, what are you doing to attract talent and retain talent, and where does pay on the scale of different tactics or levers that you're pulling to improve your employer brand or make your organization more attractive, where does that rank? And then if you're a job seeker or somebody who's thinking about moving, understanding the realities around the actual marketplace, and then determining on a scale of kind of manual labor at $15 an hour to knowledge worker maybe making six figures, where do you rank, or where does your skill set lie, and what can you expect in terms of the return on kind of your move, and how much of a wage jump you can actually feasibly get. So if you enjoyed this video and the insights we shared, hit subscribe so that you can get these updates as they come out in the future.